Now, as I said in the last section, we have all the pieces we need to build stuff. Like if you ever played with Legos, you probably know this is a 2x4 and this is a 2x2. They're the basic literally building blocks that you use when you're building a Lego model. I can even, there's a little snake, a little python. Haha. So, I can build stuff with these. It's not going to be pretty, but it'll be functional, and you might actually know what it is. At least your mom knows what it is, right? This is one that I've built more recently. I'd like to be able to blame this on my kids, but it's a 911 turbo model. And this was mine, not theirs. And this one is still built out of those basic building blocks, but there are a few pieces here that are less familiar that you wouldn't use very often, right? And then, there's the super rare pieces. I have it on good authority, again, from this one is for my kids, that, this one is a very rare, some kind of gear something, right? It's only used in one or two official Lego models, and you'd really have to know what you were doing to use this, but you'd probably only use it once in a while. Right now, so far, in those first few sections, we've covered like 80% of what you use every day, and now we're going to try to apply it to something that we're actually going to build out a bit more. We're going to do that using an API, and the API we're going to use is for this site, Reddit. You've probably run across Reddit before. It's one of the largest sites on the web. It's a large collaborative filtering site built out of a whole bunch of subsections called subreddits. So the website itself is www.reddit.com. And then this one, for example, is www.reddit.com/r/Phoenix. So each of these subreddits has a huge number of people in the, some of them are very, very small. Some of them are very, very large. This one has about 100,000 members. That's behind my head, but back behind there it says it has about 100,000 people in it. About 512 are online at this very moment. So yeah, we're gonna look at use kind of try to see if we can get at this Phoenix Reddit. You'll see that the most recent thing posted was about 2 hours ago, then about 3 hours ago. So things get posted pretty frequently. Eventually, I want to take a look and see if we can start to look at some of these places that people talk about, and see if we can make sense of that in some way programmatically so that we could use that data to find some new discoveries. That's what we're trying to do, right? So how are we going to get access to this? Well, we're going to use the API, and we're going to use what's called a wrapper, something that allows you to connect to the API using a programming language. We're going to use, obviously, a Python wrapper. That's not the only way we could do it. There's actually something called pushshift.io where they are downloading huge dumps. They're already doing it for you. They're kind of crawling through Reddit and getting as close to every post as they possibly can. Some argument over what they're getting and not getting. And if you look, these files are huge, very large files, right? So, we could do that, but honestly, it's a bit overkill to have to deal. I mean, I'm all about the big data. We could use the big data later on. We'll kind of engage in some larger data sets and some of the issues around that. But for now, this is a kind of relatively small, and we don't necessarily want historical data, right? We do a month's worth of data from earlier in the year is great, but I would love to have kind of right now what's going on. I don't know that I need it, but if you wanted to do something that was event-driven or whatever, you might want to be able to go and get the data from right now, right? So we're going to go ahead and do, the equivalent of Hello World, but using an API. There's something called pseudocode, which is the way you usually start writing a program when you're trying to think about a program. This is actually an example of pseudocode from a course that's teaching people C. And you'd write it in kind of this English example, and then have to change this and put in curly brackets and semicolons and all kinds of stuff. If you look closely, this statement actually looks like Python already. That's when they developed Python, that was the intent, to make it very easily written and read as close to English, as close to the pseudocode as you could get. So I don't know that I actually do this in the same way anymore. I do roughly, but I don't do it quite in the same way as I used to. In part, that's also because when I develop at this point, I develop not using an MVP model, that is minimal viable product, but something similar to that. I kind of do it like an onion, right? So I start with the most basic thing I could do, the hello world version of whatever I'm doing. And then I can layer things on top of that little by little. It's kind of like, it's kind of like Frankensteining something, right? You bolt things on little by little. There are some downsides to that, but especially for the kind of stuff I'm doing, it makes a whole lot of sense because at one stage that it's working. If you add something on and it stops working, it probably has to do with that thing you've added on. So it's kind of like debugging in reverse. As you add things on, you just check it. Hey, are you still working? And if you are, you know, okay, I'm doing okay. So it's actually, it saves me a lot of time for the kind of scripting work that I do. I don't know that it would be the best for working in a team to develop a web application, for example, or to develop a mobile app. I don't know that that's the best way to do it, although minimal viable products as an approach does come from the agile world. And so people do absolutely do it that way to a certain extent. But this kind of unplanned development is useful for the kind of stuff we're doing, may not be as useful in some other contexts. So how are we going to do this? For one thing, we need to get keys to the kingdom. We need to be able to access Reddit by using the API. One of the ways we do that is by using our username and password. So if you don't have a username and password on Reddit, you'll have to sign up for a free username and password. But you also need a separate set of separate username and password for your web application. So we're going to ask Reddit for a set of keys. To do that, I'm going to go over here and go to Visit Old Reddit. I'm an old person, and I know where to find things on old Reddit more easily than I do on the new visual version of Reddit. Here, I'm going to click on my username, Halave, and then I'm going to click on Preferences, and then I'm going to click on Apps. So this lists all the apps that have permission to access Reddit using my username and password. One of these is kind of Reddit on Android. It's the program that's on my mobile that accesses Reddit using that mobile device. So it needs keys to get in that way. I'm not sure what this one is. Should I be scared? These are all the permissions of things that it can do. Pretty much everything in these cases. I've got this under developed applications, things that I've written. So for example, this one is a program that I wrote that I probably don't need anymore and could probably go ahead and delete, but a program that I wrote that goes and checks what my students are doing in a particular subreddit and helps me with grading and keeping track of them. So I've got a little script that I use to do that runs every day and checks on a particular subreddit. But I'm going to create a new one because we're writing one together. I'm just going to click Create a New App, and I'll do Phoenix Hot. I don't know. It's kind of redundant, isn't it? But Phoenix Hot. So I want to find out kind of the hot places in Phoenix. I don't know what I'm doing with this yet, but that's what I'm going to call it. There are 3 different types of apps that you can, or rather APIs that you can use. One is for a web app. That is, if you're developing a web application, something that's going to sit on a website and then update. Like, for example, if I wanted my blog to show what I had most recently posted on Reddit, I could do that here, right? I could do it I could make a web app to do that. An installed app, that's like the things that are on my phone. In other words, I put something up on the Android or iPhone store, and everyone can use it, right? So I'm developing a new application. I don't think I've ever done either of those. I may have actually done one like this, but generally speaking, for the stuff we're doing, we only care about scripts for personal use. These are different because they run under your username. You don't want to distribute it with your username to everybody else. You don't want everyone to have these keys. You can distribute the code that you write, but you want them to have their own keys, their own username. You don't want other people doing stuff under your username, right? So we're going to do a script because it's for my personal use. It's a script that I'm developing so that I can find out about what's hot in Phoenix. I could write a description here. What is hot in Phoenix? This is terrible, but like for me at this point, this is mostly for my own use so I can remember later on what the script is for. I think you do need to have at least a redirect URI, but we're not actually redirecting anything, so it doesn't matter what you put here. I'm just going to put my about, since I don't have an about page for this on the web, I'm just going to put my blog on there, and I'll do the same down here for the redirect URI. Again, I think you have to have something in here, but none of this stuff really matters that much. It's good to do it as practice so that it's legible and so other people can see what it is. But generally speaking, this doesn't matter. What does matter is actually your name doesn't matter either. You could call it Sam. What matters is kind of what kind of app this is. And when I do that, I'm going to hit Create App. And it's going to go out and it's going to get me what I need, which is this secret key and also this identifier for what my script is going to use to get in. So this is kind of my username and my password for this particular API. All right. So as I've said, we're going to use an API for this and a wrapper for that API called PRAW. which is the Python Reddit API wrapper, I bet. I'm going to guess that's true. I'm going to run that. And when I do, it's going to think for a while, and then it's going to come back and tell me that it doesn't. I suspect it's going to come back and tell me it does not have that module on my, remember, we're using Colab, so we have a virtual machine here that has a lot of things that Google thought we should have, but it apparently didn't anticipate that we were going to use PRAW. This, again, is not Python that I'm typing. The exclamation point here, this is specific to, that use of the exclamation point is specific to this virtual machine on Colab, and I'm doing what I would normally type in a console, which is the Python installer, and I'm going to install PRAW. We did this once before, so it shouldn't be that unfamiliar to you, but we're going to ask Google to temporarily, on this virtual machine that it's spun up for us, we're going to ask it to install the module PRAW. Now when we import it, it should be happier. It doesn't say anything, which means it's happy. That's how you know it's happy. It doesn't say anything. And now we're gonna establish some. I'm gonna do the cooking show thing here, where I pull things out of the oven that have been sitting there. We're gonna establish some variables. These are a special kind of variable. They're only special because of the way we think about it. They're just regular variables, but we're going to call them constants. They're things that we're going to put at the top of the program so we can change them if we ever have to later on. Like I'm probably going to have to change my password now that I've shown you what it is. And then we're going to have two more here. One is the app ID and the app secret code, right? So, oh no, I need to change some things here, but I will fix that in a second. And we need to kind of figure out what those are. And we just had those over here. Let me see if I can find them. Nope, that's not it. There we go. So we have the secret code right here. I just outlined it, and I'll re-outline it. So we'll copy this over, and we'll put it into my secret. And then we will go over and grab the code ID, which is up here, the personal use script ID, which is right there. We'll copy that over. So all we're doing here is establishing a bunch of new variables, and you'll see how we're going to use them in a second. It's so we don't have to dump them into the thing. We have run into objects before. We haven't talked about them in detail. We've run into them a lot. We'll talk about them later on. That's not what it's called, but that's okay. Right now we're using PRAW, and we're establishing this object called a Reddit object. Basically, this is a little machine that we can use to interact with Reddit through the API. And what we're saying is, okay, we're starting a new variable that the object is going to be called Reddit. Note that for Python, this Reddit and this Reddit are different. For one thing, this is a method, right? It's .reddit, but also capitals matter. So we start our variables with lowercase by tradition. And so Reddit is this thing that we're setting up as an object, and it's praw.reddit. Here's our user agent. I won't talk too much about this here. It's basically telling them that I'm not using, say, Firefox, but I'm using this program that I wrote. The client ID is this app ID right here. The client secret is this app secret right here. The username is the uname I put right up here. And the password is the upass that I put right here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and run that. What this does is it just sets up the object. Again, it hasn't said anything, so we can assume that everything is going to plan. We're now going to create another object or machine that's kind of a sub-object on this. So we have this object Reddit. One of the pieces of Reddit is all of the various subreddits. So we're going to create a subreddit called Phoenix. We're just doing this so we don't have to type this reddit.subreddit Phoenix every time. So we're just putting in this. It's not. It's hard to think about these as boxes anymore, but we're kind of assigning to this box this idea of subreddit, right? Again, it's not saying anything. Keep our fingers crossed that everything's working. Now, in that subreddit, we're kind of going level by level by level, right? In that subreddit, we have submissions. So if you look here, we have an object that's subreddit stream submissions. So what's this stream mean? It doesn't mean anything particular, but in this context, what it's telling you is that when I do this, it's like a faucet that I'm going to turn on, or a file. This is a kind of like a file, right? We're going to treat it like a file. So it's like when you read lines off a file, they come in a stream one by one by one by one until you hit what's called the EOF, the end of file, when you're all done. So what this is saying is for each of the submissions in this stream of submissions, we're going to do something with each one of those. So it's going to pick up a submission kind of from the top of this stream or off the end of this stream. And then we're going to go ahead and we will print the submission. Now, this submission, again, is a thing. It's an object. So the submission has lots of pieces to it. It has the author, it has the title, it has the comments in it. It has a whole bunch of pieces that are, again, little dot attributes. So in this case, we want to print each of the titles. Let's see how this goes. There it goes. So it goes through and it's grabbing each of these and printing it as it goes. If you see here, doodly doodly do, it's still going and going. It's eventually going to hit a stop here. So it's not given its EOF. It's going to keep going with this until it hits its max. And there's a way of paging these, which we'll talk about later on. For now, that means it's stuck in some way. So we're going to hit runtime and we're going to interrupt execution. And that will stop it and let us keep going. And if you look down here, it'll give us a little note that it says that it stopped it, it interrupted it. It's not really an error. It's just saying, hey, we stopped. So we don't have quite what we want because we don't know how many of these we want to collect. We don't want to just print them. We want to do something with them. But we know that it's working. We know that we've managed to get into the space and we've managed to produce something. And that's kind of what we wanted to do. So that's great. So we'll move on from here and say, okay, what are we going to do with these things once we've got them? And do we want more than just the title? And I think we probably do.